What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors walks into what should be a routine late-night interview, only to discover the host has a hidden agenda that goes way beyond entertainment? What you're about to hear is the real story behind one of the most explosive confrontations in late-night television history, a clash so intense that it ended with Samuel L. Jackson being escorted off the Jimmy Kimmel live set. This isn't just another celebrity interview gone wrong. This is about respect, integrity, and what happens when a talk show host crosses a line that should never be crossed. Make sure you subscribe and drop a comment below, because this story will change how you see late-night television forever. The Jimmy Kimmel Live studio was buzzing with its usual pre-show energy. Cameras were being adjusted. The audience was settling in, and Jimmy Kimmel was reviewing his notes one final time. Tonight's guest was Samuel L. Jackson, the legendary actor known for his commanding presence both on and off-screen. What should have been a straightforward promotional interview for Jackson's latest film was about to become something entirely different. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the one and only Samuel L. Jackson. Kimmel announced with his trademark grin as Jackson walked onto the stage, waving to the cheering audience. Jackson settled into the guest chair, his demeanor relaxed but alert. "Good to be here, Jimmy," he said, adjusting his suit jacket. "Great to have you." "Sam, can I call you Sam?" Kimmel asked, already leaning forward with an intensity that seemed oddly misplaced for such an early moment in the interview. "Samuel works just fine," Jackson replied, his tone polite but firm. Kimmel's smile flickered for just a moment. "Right, Samuel. So let's talk about your new movie, but first I have to ask you about something that's been bothering me." Jackson raised an eyebrow. This wasn't how these interviews typically started. "What's that?" "Well, you've been pretty vocal lately about certain issues in Hollywood, and I'm wondering if you think maybe you're being a little too aggressive with your opinions." The audience fell silent. Jackson's expression shifted slightly, his eyes narrowing as he studied Kimmel's face. "Aggressive? I'm not sure what you mean by that." "Come on, Samuel, you know exactly what I mean. All this talk about representation, about how the industry treats certain actors. Don't you think maybe you're stirring up trouble where there doesn't need to be any?" Jackson leaned back in his chair, his jaw tightening. "Are you seriously asking me if I think fighting for equality and fair treatment is stirring up trouble? I'm just saying things have gotten better over the years. Maybe it's time to, move on from all that." The tension in the studio was palpable. Now Jackson's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath it. Move on from what exactly? From wanting to see talented people get the opportunities they deserve regardless of their background. Kimmel shrugged, his casual dismissiveness becoming more apparent. "I think you're making mountains out of molehills. Hollywood's changed. We don't need to keep beating this dead horse." "Dead horse?" Jackson's voice rose slightly, and several audience members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "Jimmy, are you telling me that the fight for equal representation is a dead horse?" "Look, I'm not trying to start anything here," Kimmel said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "I'm just thinking maybe you could focus more on your craft and less on politics." Jackson stared at Kimmel for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "My craft and my principles aren't separate things, Jimmy. They never have been. But don't you think actors should stay in their lane, entertain people, not lecture them?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Jackson's hands gripped the arms of his chair. "Stay in my lane. Let me ask you something, Jimmy. When you make jokes about politicians, every night are you staying in your lane?" Kimmel's confidence wavered slightly. "That's different. That's comedy." "No, that's not different at all. That's you using your platform to express your views just like I use mine. The only difference is you seem to think your views matter more than mine." "I never said that," Kimmel protested, but his defensive tone betrayed him. "You didn't have to say it. You implied it the moment you suggested I should keep my mouth shut about issues that affect people who look like me." The studio had gone completely quiet. Even the crew members were watching with rapt attention. As the interview spiraled into uncharted territory, Kimmel tried to regain control. "Samuel, I think you're misunderstanding what I'm trying to say. Here am I because it sounds to me like you brought me on this show, not to talk about my work. but to try to shut me up about the things I care about. That wasn't my intention. Kimmel stammered his smooth talk show host persona, cracking under Jackson's unflinching gaze. Then what was your intention, Jimmy? Because this sure doesn't feel like a typical promotional interview. Kimmel glanced toward his producers off stage looking for guidance but found none. He was on his own, and Jackson wasn't going to let him off the hook. You want to know what my intention was? Kimmel said, his voice taking on a sharper edge as he abandoned any pretense of friendliness. My intention was to have an honest conversation with you about how you've been conducting yourself lately. Jackson's eyebrows shot up. How I've been conducting myself, Jimmy. Who do you think you are to judge how I conduct myself? I'm someone who's been in this business long enough to know when someone's crossing lines. Kimmel shot back, his mask finally slipping completely. And you've been crossing a lot of lines lately. The audience was dead silent now, sensing they were witnessing something far beyond a normal interview. Jackson leaned forward, his voice dropping to that dangerous, quiet tone that anyone familiar with his work would recognize as a warning. What lines have I crossed, Jimmy? Be specific. Himmel straightened in his chair, apparently thinking he had regained some control. Well, for starters, that speech you gave at the award ceremony last month. You basically called out half of Hollywood. I called out an industry that still has work to do. That's not crossing a line, that's telling the truth. But you made a lot of people uncomfortable. Kimmel insisted. Jackson's laugh was cold. Good people should be uncomfortable when they're part of the problem. See, that's exactly what I'm talking about, Kimmel said, pointing at Jackson. That attitude right there, you act like you're some kind of moral authority. I act like someone who's been in this business for decades and has earned the right to speak his mind, Jackson replied, his voice growing. More intense, something you apparently have a problem with? Kimmel shook his head. I don't have a problem with you speaking your mind. I have a problem with you attacking people who are trying to help attacking people, Jimmy. When have I ever attacked anyone who is genuinely trying to help? You know what I mean. You criticize directors, producers, executives who are making an effort. Jackson's expression hardened. Making an effort, Jimmy. Do you know what making an effort looks like to me? It looks like actually hiring people. Not just talking about hiring them. It looks like giving opportunities. Not just giving lip service, but you can't expect everything to change overnight, Kimmel argued. Overnight. Jackson's voice rose again. Jimmy, I've been in this business for over 30 years. How long do you think we should wait for basic fairness? Kimmel was starting to look flustered, sweat beading on his forehead under the studio lights. I'm just saying, maybe you could be more diplomatic about it. Diplomatic? Jackson repeated the word like it tasted bitter. You mean quiet. You mean compliant. You mean I should smile and nod and be grateful for scraps. That's not what I said. It's exactly what you said. You just don't have the courage to say it. Directly, Jackson's stare was withering. Let me ask you something, Jimmy. When was the last time you used your platform to call out inequality in this industry? Kimmel's mouth opened and closed without sound for a moment. Well, I support various causes. That's not what I asked. When was the last time you used this show, this platform, to specifically address the lack of diversity in entertainment? I don't think that's really my place, Kimmel mumbled. But it is your place to tell me to stay quiet about. The contradiction hung in the air like a smoking gun. Several audience members were now murmuring among themselves, clearly uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. Kimmel tried a different approach. Look, Samuel, I brought you on here because I thought we could have a real conversation about this stuff. Manto man. Jackson's voice was dangerously quiet again. Jimmy. Manto man, you ambushed me. You brought me on here under the pretense of promoting my film, and instead you're trying to dress me down like I'm some kind of troublemaker who needs to be put in his place. I never said you were a troublemaker. You didn't have to. Your whole attitude tonight has been condescending from the moment I sat down. You started by asking if you could call me Sam when I told you Samuel, then you immediately launched into questioning my character and my right to speak up about issues I care about. Kimmel was visibly rattled, now his composure completely gone. I think you're being oversensitive. Here the words were barely out of his mouth before Jackson's hand slammed down. On the arm of his chair, the sharp crack echoed through the studio. Oversensitive. Jackson's voice was like thunder. Now, did you just call me oversensitive for objecting to your disrespect? I didn't mean Kimmel started to backpedal, but Jackson cut him off. No, you meant exactly what you said. You think I'm being oversensitive because I won't sit here and let you lecture me about how I should conduct myself. You think I should just shut up and be grateful to be here, Samuel. Please, let's just take it down a notch. Kimmel pleaded, looking toward his producers again. Don't you dare tell me to take it down a notch, Jackson said, standing up from his chair. You started this, Jimmy. You brought me on here to try to humiliate me, and now you want me to calm down. 'Cause it's not going the way you planned. The studio was electric with tension. Audience members were looking around at each other, unsure whether they should be watching or looking away. Production assistants were whispering frantically into their headsets. I never tried to humiliate you, Kimmel said weakly. Jackson looked down at him with contempt. Then what would you call this whole setup? What would you call bringing a guest on your show and immediately attacking their integrity and their right to speak up about injustice? Kimmel's face had gone pale under the studio lights, his usual cockiness replaced by visible panic, as Jackson towered over him waiting for an answer that would never come. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity before Jackson shook his head in disgust. You can't answer that question, can you, Jimmy, because you know exactly what this is. This is you trying to put me in my place, trying to silence someone whose voice threatens your comfortable little world, where you get to decide who speaks and who doesn't. That's not true. Kimmel protested weakly, his voice barely above a whisper. Isn't it? Jackson's voice boomed through the studio. Then explain to me why you didn't ask me a single question about my film. Explain to me why. The first words out of your mouth were about my so-called aggressive opinions. Explain to me why you think it's your job to tell a grown man, a successful actor with decades of experience, that he should stay in his lane. Kimmel's mouth moved, but no sound came out. The camera operators were still filming, capturing every moment of his humiliation, as Jackson continued his verbal assault. You know what the real problem is here, Jimmy? The real problem is that you're comfortable with the status. You're comfortable in a world where people like me are supposed to be grateful for whatever opportunities we get, and we're supposed to keep quiet about the ones we don't get. You're comfortable with inequality as long as it doesn't affect you personally. I've never said anything like that, Kimmel managed to croak out. You don't have to say it. Your actions speak louder than your words ever could. You brought me on this show tonight, not as a respected colleague, not as an accomplished actor, but as someone you could lecture and dismiss. You thought you could humiliate me in front of your audience, and I'd just sit there and take it. Jackson began pacing now, his energy filling the entire studio as every person present hung on his every word. The audience was completely captivated, witnessing something they'd never seen before on late-night television. Let me tell you something about respect. Jimmy, respect isn't something you can fake. It's not something you can pretend to have when the cameras are rolling, and then abandon when you think nobody's watching. Real respect means treating people as equals, not as problems to be solved or voices to be silenced. Kimmel tried to interrupt Samuel. I do respect you. I've always respected your work. My work. Jackson spun around to face him directly. You respect my work, but not my right to have opinions about my industry. You respect my ability to entertain you, but not my intelligence or my experience or my perspective on issues that directly affect my life and career. The question hung in the air like an accusation. Kimmel's producers were now visible at the edge of the stage, clearly debating whether to intervene, but none of them seemed willing to step between. Jackson and their host, that's selective respect, Jimmy. That's conditional respect. That's the kind of respect that says you're valuable as long as you stay in the box we've created for you. But the moment you step outside that box, the moment you use your voice for something other than our entertainment, then you become a problem. Jackson's voice grew even more powerful, filling every corner of the studio. And that's exactly what you tried to do tonight. You tried to put me back in that box. You tried to remind me of my place. Well, let me remind you of something, Jimmy. I don't have a place. I have a career. I have a platform and I have a voice, and I'll use all three. However I see fit. I never meant to imply, Kimmel started, but Jackson cut him off with a gesture. Don't insult my intelligence with more lies. We both know exactly what you meant to imply. We both know this was a setup from the beginning. You had no intention of having a respectful conversation about my work or my career. You had every intention of trying to dress me down on national television. The audience was completely silent now. Some people looking uncomfortable, others leaning forward in fascination. This was unlike anything they'd ever witnessed in a late-night talk show setting. But here's what you didn't count on, Jimmy. You didn't count on me refusing to play along with your little game. You didn't count on me standing up for myself and calling out your disrespect. You thought I'd just smile and nod and let you walk all over me. Jackson moved closer to Kimmel's desk, his presence commanding the entire space. You know what's really pathetic about this whole situation? You could have had a genuine conversation with me tonight. You could have asked thoughtful questions about my career, about the projects I'm passionate about the changes I've seen in the industry over the years. You could have engaged with me as an equal, as a professional, as someone whose experience and perspective might actually be valuable to your audience. Instead, you chose to be small. You chose to be petty. You chose to use your platform, not to elevate the conversation, but to try to diminish someone you apparently see as a threat to your worldview. Kimmel's hands were shaking now as he gripped his note cards. Samuel, please, can we just pretend this didn't happen? Can we just move on? Like you didn't just spend the last 20 minutes trying to humiliate me. Can we just go back to you asking me softball questions about my movies while we both pretend you respect me? Jackson's laugh was bitter. No, Jimmy, we can't just do anything. You made your choice when you decided to ambush me tonight. You made your choice when you decided my voice was too loud, my opinions too strong, my presence too threatening to your comfortable little world. I made a mistake, Kimmel said desperately. I can admit that I made a mistake. Oh, you made more than a mistake, Jimmy. You made a calculated decision to try to silence someone whose voice you don't like. The only mistake you made was underestimating who you were dealing with. Jackson straightened his jacket and looked directly into the main camera to everyone. Watching at home, let me be clear about something. This is what happens when you speak up about inequality. This is what happens when you refuse to stay quiet about injustice. This is what happens when you use your platform to fight for people who don't have one. He turned back to Kimmel, who was now visibly sweating. People like Jimmy here will try to shame you into silence. They'll try to make you feel like you're being too aggressive, too political, too difficult. They'll try to convince you that things are fine the way they are, that you should be grateful for what you have and stop asking for what you deserve. But here's what they don't understand. Equality isn't a favor that's granted by people in power. Justice isn't something you ask politely for and hope someone gives you out of the goodness of their heart. These things are rights, and rights are something you fight for, not something you beg for. The studio was electric with tension. Jackson's words were resonating, not just with the audience, but with everyone present, from the crew members to the producers, who were still debating what to do. And when you do fight for those rights, when you do speak up for yourself and others, there will always be people like Jimmy who try to shut you down. They'll try to make you feel like you're the problem, like you're being unreasonable, like you should just accept the way things are and stop making waves. Jackson's voice rose to its full power. But I've got news for people like Jimmy. I've been making waves my entire career, and I'm not about to stop now. I've been speaking up for what's right for decades, and I'm not about to let some talk show host intimidate me into silence. He looked directly at Kimmel again. You thought you could bring me on here and make an example out of me. You thought you could show your audience and your industry colleagues that even Samuel L. Jackson could be put in his place if you just applied the right pressure. Well, you were wrong. Jimmy, dead wrong. The only example being made here tonight is you showing everyone exactly who you really are beneath that friendly late-night host persona. You're showing everyone that your respect is conditional, that your tolerance has limits, and that your comfort is more important to you than other people's dignity. At this point, several security personnel had appeared at the edges of the stage, clearly summoned by the increasingly frantic producers. Jackson noticed them and smiled grimly. And there it is, the final piece of the puzzle. When you can't win the argument, when you can't justify your behavior, when you can't defend your actions, you call security. You try to remove the problem instead of addressing it. He looked around. At the security guards, gentlemen. I understand you're just doing your jobs, but let me be clear about something. I'm not a threat to anyone here. I'm not violent. I'm not dangerous. I'm just a man who refuses to be disrespected on national television. Turning back to Kimmel one final time, Jackson delivered his final words with devastating precision. Jimmy, this has been educational. You've taught me something important tonight. You've taught me that there are still people in this industry who think they can treat accomplished professionals like children who need to be scolded. You've taught me that there are still people who think having a platform gives them the right to silence others. But most importantly, you've taught everyone watching that when someone stands up to that kind of treatment, when someone refuses to back down in the face of disrespect, there are consequences, and sometimes those consequences involve showing the whole world exactly who you really are. Jackson began, walking toward the exit, the security guards flanking him but not touching him clearly, recognizing that he was leaving voluntarily. As he reached the edge of the stage, he turned back one final time to everyone out there watching this. Remember tonight. Remember what it looks like when someone tries to silence a voice they don't want to hear. Remember what it looks like when someone stands up to that silencing. And remember that your voice matters too. No matter who tries to tell you, it doesn't. With that, Samuel L. Jackson walked off the Jimmy Kimmel live stage, leaving behind a stunned audience, a humiliated host, and a moment that would be talked about for years to come. The cameras kept rolling as Kimmel sat in his chair, speechless, his face red with embarrassment, unable to find any words to salvage what had just happened. The silence in the studio was deafening. No one knew what to say, what to do, or how to process what they had just witnessed. Jimmy Kimmel, the man who made a living, with words had been rendered completely mute by the power of Samuel L. Jackson's truth. What did you think of this incredible confrontation? Have you ever seen a guest completely dismantle a host like this before? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more stories that show what really happens when the cameras are rolling and the gloves come off in Hollywood wood.